Hello, folks. Welcome to Comic Tropes. I am super excited to have my guest today. I've made an episode about his work. I make no bones about the fact that I'm a fan. He's done stuff for Marvel. He's done stuff for DC. He's done all sorts of self-published stuff through Image, Dark Horse, you name it. But he's got an upcoming book that he's both writing and illustrating called Do a Powerbomb. Let's get into talking about the career, the techniques, the history. Here's my guest, Daniel Warren Johnson. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Dude, thanks so much for having me. I love the channel. I am very appreciative of your video you did of me. I think I got a lot of new people into my work, so I'm kind of indebted to you for that. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I just love comics, so I try mostly to, on my channel, talk about positive things and what I can recommend. Sometimes we'll critique certain things so that it's not all just nothing but, I don't know, rubbing each other's fire hose. I'll just make up a new metaphor. I
respect that.
Quick question. I'm just realizing, what should I be calling you? You go by like D-Dubs on your YouTube channel, your professional name. You use all three, Daniel Warren Johnson. What should I be calling you?
Man, my friends call me Dan, so let's just go with that.
Easy. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Dan. Wonderful.
I actually have every once in a while, because I live in Chicago and there's a lot of people here. Sometimes I'll see people that I know kind of professionally, or they know my work, and they'll call me Daniel or whatever. And then my friends who will be with me will be like, I think you mean Dan, because that's how they all know me. But everybody in the comics world knows me as Daniel. So I'm called Daniel just as often as Dan.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I'm gonna do things slightly chronological here, because you sort of started with comics, specifically doing webcomics like Space Mullet and Green Leader, things like that, at least that I'm aware of. And to me, what's interesting about that is when somebody's doing like a webcomic to break in, it really, to me, shows that they're passionate about just drawing or just that they're passionate about comics, because it's not like you do that to instantly get rich and get famous. It's because you truly love the medium. First of all, do I have that right? That you're pretty passionate about this stuff?
I think so, yeah. I kind of fell into comics a little bit when I first started Space Mullet, because I was trying to figure out how I could make money doing drawing, and because I think, and you mentioned on the video, that I really didn't like teaching very much. And I was honestly looking for any way out of it where I could kind of like make a paycheck. So I was trying a million different things that were all related to somehow making art with my right hand, and Space Mullet was one of the things that I happened to try. And I'd always kind of wanted to do comics, but it's like, I remember I did a few comics in college for like projects where I like convinced the professor that if I could do like a comic instead of a final paper, that kind of thing. And every time it totally kicked my ass. Like, it was so hard having to draw things. Like, you come up with a story, and then as a new comic artist, not knowing just how much random stuff you have to draw to get the story across to the reader was really challenging, to the point where it kind of scared me off of it. So when I had come off teaching, which was a very tough experience, I was like, man, teaching is tough, but or comics are tough, but they're not as tough as teaching a class of 7th graders. So I think I should give it another try.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got like a lot of interests that you've like shared in interviews and your social media and stuff, music, wrestling, as well as drawing. But I'm curious specifically about like drawing. Like, about how old would you say you were when you realized that you could translate some of your ideas onto paper? Like, about how old were you when you started realizing that you could do that?
I'm thinking like 1st grade. Drawing Power Rangers was the first thing that I really dove into. I don't know why. Power Rangers made me want to draw, so I just draw Power Rangers all the time. And it started there. So thank you, Power Rangers. Because I was also reading comic strips at the time, but for whatever reason, I never felt compelled to like draw Calvin or Hobbes, from comic strips. The art style, I think, maybe it was because it was so unique to the artist. There was
Right.
no room for visual interpretation. Uh,
No,
um,
it's true. Like sometimes like the superheroes and stuff like that are sort of like simple and iconic and almost abstracted to like be adapted by lots of people, whereas a lot of comic strips are relying on that particular artist's interpretation of the world. It's funny that you mentioned that because, like, while I'm not necessarily a professional artist or anything, I remember also being like 10 years old and making like a 60-page Transformers comic because it was like that's what like I was watching. That's what I knew, and like who but a kid would do something so ambitious with no point to it. But I kind of love it. Like, I look back at it and I'm just like, I love that I was so fearless. I wasn't reading comics either at the time, but I think I might have gotten the ideas from comic strips.
That's awesome, man. You had a better work ethic than I did. I was just doing little pinups of like Power Rangers doing different moves. So that's where it started, like first grade. And then I also got into it too because I would show my drawings to like my fellow first graders and they were like, whoa, that's so good. And
Absolutely.
even at first grade, I was on my way to not being popular. So any kind of like boost I could get socially, I would take, and drawings kind of helped me get there.
uh, we touched on this just a moment ago. You did get a degree to teach. You gave that a fair shake. You probably had a bunch of different paths in front of you. What was it that you do you remember if there was any specific inciting incident for you to decide I want to go for comics? Like was there either a particular piece of art that inspired you or a particular bad day and just teaching or something? Was there any inciting incident, or was it just a gradual thing where you just sort of came to realize you might be happier doing something different?
I think, well, there are a few things, but the number one thing that jumped, there's two things. When I was in college, I had kind of not given up on comics, but I was kind of like, I just wasn't reading them a ton. Like I remember all freshman year, I kind of turned my back on all the nerd stuff, and I was kind of doing different things that were like college related, and but I still loved to draw. And then as I got into my sophomore year, I started meeting some more friends in college that shared, like, we had kind of a shared interest in comic books. And that's where, like, the first time that I read Spawn, because I had never read Spawn in the 90s like a normal kid, like, because I was super sheltered as a homeschooler. I read, like, I was getting exposed to Invincible at the time. A lot of like the kind of early the second Image boom, like with Walking Dead as well. Those kind of comics got me really excited just to like actually read comics again, comics from the American market. I remember being exposed to Hellboy freshman year of college. That was a huge deal. And I had always liked from then on reading comics and going to the comic book store. I remember All-Star Superman being there throughout my entire junior and senior year of college, which was huge for me. So all that kind of contributed to my regrowth of love of reading comics as an adult. And then after teaching, during teaching, I was not reading as many comics, but I was still kind of on the outskirts. Every once in a while, I'd check something out. And I was reading BPRD a lot because in following in my love of Hellboy, and I loved BPRD.
Plus Guy Davis, just tremendous and underrated artist.
Like, you said it. You hit the nail on the head there. He's so good.
Incredible.
I love his looseness and the way that he approaches his lines. And there's like a devil may care approach to those lines where it's like,
or at least he makes it look that way. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? And you might be right. He might be like listening to this interview and being like, what are you talking about? This like I just worked over that,
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, Guy, wow, you are super impressive.
So good. So good.
One of my all-time favorites.
Totally agree.
So it was around this time where Guy Davis had taken a break, and there was BPRD, The Long Death had come out. I believe this is like late 2010, 2011.
Mm-hmm.
A 3-issue series of the Wendigo versus the cat monster. I can't remember people who know BPRD will know what I'm talking about. But James Harren took over the art duties.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot about that. That's right. That was really James Harren, wasn't it?
It was. And I saw James's work in that series, and also Abe Sapien, The Devil Does Not Jest, which was a few months before. It was a 2-issue miniseries, like standalone Abe Sapien adventure tale. Those issues, I was teaching during those issues, and I was so blown away by his art that I thought to myself, like, I got to try comics again. So it was related to trying to make money after I'd quit teaching. But the that second wind that I got of wanting to try and do comics again was partially for going breadth, trying everything, but also hugely inspired by James's work and his line making. So I've been very open about it in interviews before, and I'll say it again. Like, without James, I wouldn't be doing comics today. I think that's just a fact.
Ultra Mega must have just hit every button for you.
It did. That was an amazing book, and
it definitely
was really exciting. You know what? I'm going to take credit for this because, I've been so influenced by James's lines. Like, I owe him a lot. Without him, I wouldn't be here, like I said. But also, I remember we took a trip to Japan in 2015, and I had been a fan for a while, and I had been working on Extremity with Skybound for a little bit. Yeah, right there. And I had just started the process. Like, I was writing issue 1 of Extremity on the plane to Tokyo. I finished the whole first issue script on the plane. It was a long plane ride.
I'm familiar.
And I remember we were riding on the bus from the airport, Narita Airport, to our hotel. And I had happened to sit next to James, and we were kind of going back and forth, and I told him what he was working on, and he's like, "Oh, wow, you're writing and drawing Extremity." And I said, "Yeah, I am. I'm really enjoying it." And James is like, "I've always wanted to do that, but I'm a little worried about taking that jump." And I said, I was like, "Look, I know for a fact Skybound is excited about your work. Like, I know Robert Kirkman is a big fan. Like, I'm pretty sure if you pitched them an idea, they would say yes."
Wow.
And sure enough, I was like, "You should do it. I've had a really good experience at Skybound. I think you would too." And sure enough, he pitched them Ultra Mega to Skybound, and cha-ching. So you're welcome, James.
You were both on the plane to Tokyo together. Were you going to a comic convention or something like that?
It was a trip that my art rep, Felix Comic Art, had set up. Felix used to sell toys in the 90s to like big time collectors before like eBay and the internet, where things could get shipped overseas was easy. So he would go and get toys for different collectors, and he would be there for like the big toy releases in Japan. So he knew all the cool places to go shopping. He knew all the train stops, and he just took a bunch of comic book artists out. We stayed in like a ratty hostel. Yeah, I shared a room with Nick Pitara.
Okay.
Yeah, and then every day Felix would get us up at like 7:30. He's like, "All right, get up. We're going to go to this bookstore nobody knows about." And we'd go over to this bookstore, and we'd be looking through all these bins. And it was awesome because I knew artists that I loved that nobody else knew. So I'd be like, "Oh, this artist is here." And then I would show them this like obscure manga, and Nick Dragata would be like, "Oh my God, where'd you get that? I need that." And then Nick Pitara would do the same. And then like that's where I really got reignited my love, because James showed me a copy of Lampo, the Hypersonic Boy by Tetsuro Ueyama that I had read. I had read his Metal Guardian Faust when I was like 16 years old. He was the only thing of his that got translated. It was like a 1-volume thing. The art is incredible, but he did a bunch of stuff in Japan that James knew about. And so I was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing. I gotta find a copy of that." And so we just did this round robin of like, everybody getting other people to buy other mangas.
That's so fun. That's so fun.
A blast. And then at nighttime we'd hang out. We'd have a few drinks at the hostel, which like there was barely any place to sit, but they had a nice little outdoor patio area. And it was like in August. It was like brutally hot and humid. The air conditioning didn't really work in the room, so we'd come outside, hang out, and we would draw for hours. I mean, we were just all feeding off each other. The energy was incredible. Some of the best 5 days of my life, hands down.
I'm hoping right now. My wife and I are in the early process of planning another trip for this August. It is super hot then, but I'm thinking maybe I could go to Comic Cat, which I've never been to. Quick question: did you guys ever go to Sakaido and look at all the aisles and aisles of like the screen tones and the pens and stuff like that?
Sakaido was like the number one spot that I needed to go to. I was so excited, and Felix, I think, had never, he had never had a reason to go to Sakaido. So he's like, man, I've never been there. This be interesting. And sure enough, we went. We just perused through all the screen tones and all of the different art supplies they had. It was glorious.
Since we're going down this track, I'd love to like follow up on some real like technical stuff for a moment.
Let's do it.
A lot of your commission work that I've seen you do is black and white, and it seems to have screen tone, but is that physical screen tone, or are you doing that digitally, or is it a mixture?
That's physical screen tone. That is
it really?
Right behind me. Hold on.
I love working with that stuff, but it's very time consuming.
It is. Here we go. Here's a ratty piece of screen tone.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever like read back in the day, Eastman and Laird were doing Ninja Turtles, and they would like try to add value by adding screen tone and stuff, since it was just a black and white book. And they talk about how they used every bit of like each page that they could, like keeping those little bits, because you never know if you could like, use it for like a turtle's tail or elbow or something like that.
I do the same exact thing, and it's like, look at how skinny this thing is.
Yeah. I don't know if you'll have an opportunity to use it, but hopefully.
What's so funny is like I will find pieces of screen tone like in my armpit, like because it just gets sticky, and I'll find it all around. And then Rachel will find it on the floor, because I'm in my studio right now, but my wife Rachel will find it like in our living space, and she's like, "You gotta watch out, we got a baby in the house."
What about like, let's just talk about tools and stuff. Like, tell me about, do you have favorite pens, for instance? Like you obviously have a very distinctive inking style. You ink your own work, like some really thick, cool brush strokes that often imply like action, that you've got a great way to like sort of fade that away. You've got interesting hatching. Like, what kind of pens or brushes do you like using?
Well, I used to be like a super purist, where like I would only have like a Winsor Newton Series 7, and I would be that guy in Blick Art Materials, where I'm like, I need a glass of water, and I need to check every like Winsor Newton Series 7 brush to make sure there's no outward like, like hairs. And
nice and precise.
Yeah, nice and precise. And they're like, oh God, this guy again. But I've kind of loosened up since then, and it is really more about getting the page done and the tools that are going to allow me to do that the fastest. So I default mostly to, pencil. I have a nice like pencil mark, like all futz on my hand. I'm going to sneeze in a second. And so I just, regular a mechanical pencil, and I use this really specific brand of mechanical pencil lead. It's this is really nerdy, but I
want to hear.
Yeah, it's called Neox Graphite. Neox Graphite. And I found, I've had a few artists ask me like, you pencil so hard on the page. It's something that I'm trying to get lighter, but and when I go to erase, I would be like my inks would get murdered. So I tried using like nicer lead, and it actually was a game changer, because it's just so much easier to erase if you just use nice lead. And Neox Graphite's not cheap, but I love it, and I swear by it now. So,
was it recommended to you, or just something you found through trial and error?
You know what? I went on JetPens, and I bought the most expensive mechanical pencil that I could buy. I was like, let's give it a shot.
There's got to probably be a reason it's so expensive, right? Probably.
Yeah. And I was also like trying other brands at the time, like anything that was like over $5. I was like, let's just give it a try, or $5 or over. And I tried a bunch, and Neox was the clear winner. So Neox, call me up.
Yeah, I think Neox and Jet Pens should both be sponsors for your YouTube show, because because I've definitely heard you mention like Jet Pens, and on social media you're like, look, I got like, and you just have like mountains of pens, but I didn't really know exactly what kind they were.
A lot of the other things that I order on JetPens are just me experimenting with stuff that I have not tried before, which I feel is like really important because things are always evolving and changing, and I want to just stay on top of things as best I can. And then, but a lot of times, what I'll just use is like a micron, like an '08 micron.
Really? Oh, that's pretty thick.
Well, I found that if I go any smaller, then I'm just doing these useless lines that barely show up, and when my book goes to print anyway.
Interesting. So that sort of forces you to like get used to lines that will reproduce well.
Correct. It forces me to not be too precious.
Okay.
Which is something that I learned on the Ghost Fleet and Extremity. Trying to do all this like really, really light feathering on the page that really does not translate super well when the book goes to print. So there's a fine line, no pun intended, of walking that tightrope of too detailed.
It really cracks me up for some reason.
I wasn't trying to be funny.
No, that's why it works.
But yeah, so micron a lot, and then sometimes I will use a like traditional ink and a brush. I'll usually default to a ratty Winsor Newton, and I don't use soap. I don't like cleaning my brushes. I just run them under cold water for a few seconds after I use them, and that's that. And then most of the time, most of my lines are done with a Pentel Pocket brush pen. So just the I don't have one here, but just like the tiny little travel brush pen that has the refills.
Okay.
And it does a really good job of like the eraser will not pull up the ink. Yep.
Chris, my wife just got me, are you talking about anything like that? Because she just got me this to play with.
Have you never used it?
Nope. Not these.
Oh.
I've used different Pentel brush pens, but not these. So is that really?
That's so like I use that brush on every single page of Wonder Woman and every single page of Beta.
Really?
Oh yeah.
That's very interesting to me. Now, if I pick that up, I'll just fall down right now.
So one thing, this is really in the weeds, but I think you'll appreciate it. So one thing that I love about comics, and this kind of goes back to Guy Davis too, is that kind of free form, even if unintentional, the devil may care line. The ability to get an idea down and get a cool image down without being so obsessive about how the line is put down that it starts slowing you down and you start becoming obsessive about the work that is actually supposed to be fun, for me at least. So one thing that I feel like can happen, or did happen with me when I was using these perfect tools, is I was focusing more on the tool and the exact crisp line that I wanted, instead of just getting the book done, for lack of a better way to put it. And one thing about the Pentel brush pen is that it is a little wiggly. It's a little wobbly. Whereas you use a Winsor Newton, that's going to be like a cut.
Flowing.
Whoosh, it's like a katana slice.
Perfect. Okay.
But then it requires perfection from the user. You really have to be intentional with every single like a Disney artist almost. Whereas the Pentel Pocket brush pen, it has this kind of life of its own. It has a little bit of a wiggle, a little bit of a bounce that I really love, that's separate from more traditional brushes.
Well, and I think that is a piece of what gives your art some of its energy. You might be right. It's also just really nice to, when I'm done with using it, and I am the kind of guy who has I look like this at the drawing board. I'll show you this. I have a fist here of supplies, and I'm going like this, and then I swap. Yep.
And I swap. I can't only use a brush and then only use a micron. It's always everything all the time.
Very interesting. Yeah, and I'm not trying to imply, by the way, that the brush is what gives you your style so much as you've got a vision in your head and you found a tool that's giving you what you're looking for. So that's why you're using it. But yeah. Totally. Interesting. I fan of your art, but of course you've been writing your own projects for quite a while now, actually. You've been an auteur, we'll say. But it's true. And I'm just curious, like your first work, of course, was doing stuff like with Donny Cates, and you did like Alabaster too and stuff like that. But did you end up either hitting a tough deadline or have a project that was just an special challenge or something that ended up pivoting you to writing your own material, or was it a natural evolution and that's a completely separate thing?
I think it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
When I started first like making comics at all, it was with Space Mullet, and I, out of necessity, wrote and drew that. And I had never really written anything long form before, so it was a really big struggle of me just, doing trial and error with just story beats and really simple things like, if a scene ends, how do I go to the next scene? Like, it was almost like I didn't even know how to do it, where I didn't have the confidence just go to a next scene. I was like, well, they have to walk through a door. They have to get to the next scene. But in reality, when you watch a movie, that's not what happens. You just show exactly what you need to show.
Right.
So simple things like that, where I'm like falling over my own self trying to figure out how to do this. And I learned just by doing it. And then with the Ghost Fleet, I had a great time. But, and I did it, because it sounded like a good time, and I was going to get paid to do it. I was going to get a page rate. It was really exciting. After Ghost Fleet ended, a little bit like, oh, okay, I don't have any work. And for lack of a better way to put it, I was kind of like waiting for a writer to kind of work with to go into the next project, which just kind of adds another element of uncertainty to my own career path, which I did not like. And then when I was offered Alabaster, Alabaster was pretty tough. It was a tough collaborative process, and to the point where like I was getting kind of burnt out towards the end of Alabaster. And as I was working on Alabaster, I was like, you know what? If I keep doing projects like this, I'm gonna like not really like drawing anymore. And I don't want that to be the case. Like, I would really love to do this as long as possible and enjoy it as long as possible. And so you mentioned Green Leader very early in our interview, and
yeah, love that.
Thank you.
I mean, I did. Let me just interrupt and just say, it's a Star Wars fan comic and stuff, but like you did it out of love, and it's amazing because it's a silent comic, which I feel like ever since I read as a young kid G.I. Joe 21 by Larry Hama, silent comics are just like can be so powerful, but I'm sure they're tough. But anyway, that's just a little side note. Please tell me a little bit more about why you decided to do that.
I appreciate side notes. I think that to kind of I remember I got some pushback by some of my professional friends who were like, when I told them I wanted to do this Green Leader book, because I was specifically looking for a way to just like have fun making comics without any sort of like money attachment or deadlines or anything, just to see if I still kind of enjoyed the process after Alabaster. And I really did. And I had such a good time. I still remember working on that, those like the spread, like that first spread of all the ships attacking that Star Destroyer, and man, I remember like drawing it, and I was having such a good time, and it was like flowing through me. I felt like I don't know what it's like to like be a basketball star and having like a 30-point game or whatever, but when you're in the zone, I can only imagine that I felt a little bit of that when I was working on that book. And it's such a pure process, and then I refused to like sell it officially. Of course I couldn't, not legally, but right. I bring it with me to shows, and I just have people give me a donation, whatever they think it's worth. Some people walk away with it as like a little free handout. Some people give me $5. It all just depends. But there's this kind of freeness to like, or that I found of not only doing something just because it was fun, but also like, again, writing my own stuff and bringing my own ideas to the table and being able to execute it in a way that I felt satisfied with. So that kind of led into me really seriously considering like making Extremity. And I just put together a pitch. I didn't really know where the story was going to head, but I knew that I needed to try and pitch it around. And I came up with like an 8-page like little preview story. It's basically like a different version of the first 8 pages of issue 1 of Extremity, and I shopped that around to Dark Horse and to Skybound, and Skybound was really excited. So was Dark Horse, but I decided to go with Skybound, and it was a great working relationship, and they pushed the book a ton, and there was a lot of support there. I had great editorial help from Sean Makowitz, actually, who's the editor, one of the editors over there, and just a great experience. And it was, again, a reinforcement of, I am choosing my own projects, I'm choosing my own stories, I'm choosing how I'm going to execute them, and I do love collaborating. When there's an awesome collaboration and you're syncing, it's fantastic. But again, just from a business standpoint, I wanted as much clear vision as I possibly could, and that meant writing for myself.
I felt like passion shows through on any project, and I thought that there was passion in there. I personally felt like I might be seeing an evolution of art style in at least the way that you conveyed motion specifically. Just because when you're doing things like Ghost Fleet and stuff, you're dealing with objects in an atmosphere. You can show, the rustle of leaves and stuff like that. With Green Leader, we're dealing with objects in space. So you came up with like really extreme angles, and you came up with a lot more, in my opinion, of like the blur lines on objects to sort of show that motion blur, which just like really, really made an impression on me, how you would do that and still show a lot of technical detail. Any thoughts to like how you had to approach that in terms of coming up with like, the angles and the composition to imply motion in space, or did it come naturally?
With that one, I think it did come naturally. That was one thing that I was really struggling with in the early stages of Space Mullet. I knew that I wanted to have a more kinetic feeling in my pages as I was learning how to draw comics early on, and knowing that I was not hitting it. I didn't know exactly how to get there, but I knew that I wasn't getting that. But I think you're right. I think like all the work that I had put in with Space Mullet, with the Ghost Fleet, with even with Alabaster, I did learn a lot about my own art style on Alabaster, and drawing different things than I normally would. It just all kind of informed my myself that was working on Green Leader, that I just had a better eye for how to attack these problem solving nature of how to make things look more cool. And I was basically I can't honestly say that I was actively thinking about any of the things that you mentioned. That's awesome that you saw those. But honestly, I was just kind of going at 100 miles an hour. And I remember I did it right after Emerald City Comic-Con 2015. I was sitting next to all of these guys that were with Felix Comic Art at the time. James was on my left. I think Riley Rossmo was sitting on my right. There's this whole lineup of amazing artists I met Felix for the first time. It was really my first show that I was kind of viewed as like a kind of a professional, if that makes sense.
That was my first year going to that convention, because I had just moved out here, and I totally remember that row of tables. It's just so funny to think I probably like walked past while you were working on that and didn't really know what I was missing at the time. But oh my God.
Well, I was just, you're in that environment where everybody's working at the top of your game. And I went home, or actually we spent a few days after, maybe even a week. I took some time off from drawing to spend in Seattle after that show. And I remember sketching in my sketchbook. I have it here. Some of the thumbnails for Green Leader. Like I sketched out the whole thing in my sketchbook while I was on vacation, just knowing that like I was going to smash this. Like I was just going to crush it. I felt good about it as soon as I came up with the idea. And I don't know. It's so exciting. As I'm talking to you about it, I remember the feelings that I got as I was getting ready and working on it. And it's kind of like a warm fuzzy. It's cool.
That's so great to hear. The other thing I notice in it, aside from sort of what I'm talking about in terms of technique, well, this is also a piece of technique, was literally the storytelling panel to panel structure was a little different than what I'd seen before. Again, this could just be me like reading too much into things, but and maybe it's because it was quiet too, but I sensed, how do I phrase this? It's a positive, and I'm just trying to think of like how to say it accurately, but I'll just mumble my way through it. In general, there is a different approach, I think, to pacing when I read manga versus a lot of American comics, especially today. A lot of American comics go for maybe like certain cinematic tropes, whereas manga will like really slow down and compress time depending on what emotional beat they want to emphasize, like, and they it's a lot better than just, in the 90s, we saw people trying to do it and it ended up with like speed lines and close up eyeballs. And there are better ways to do it, but is manga an influence for you? You've mentioned James Harren, who has some of that influence. Is manga an influence for you?
100%. I remember reading manga, like starting to get into manga when I was about 16. And actually one of the first mangas that I ever got was Tetsuro Ueyama's Metal Guardian Faust that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
Which is actually it was like a weird story. It didn't make much sense and the translation was not great. And it was also mirrored to be an American style, left to right. But those lines really had an impact on me. The speed lines, the kind of blurring effect that you mentioned with that little, that is a huge. I basically stole that from Tetsuro Ueyama. I can't lie. He came up with it, and I just loved the way it looked. It just looked so cool. And so he was a huge influence very early on. And then I was also reading Trigun and not Metal. What's the one?
Full Metal.
Thank you. Full
Metal Alchemist.
Full Metal Alchemist. Reading that, really loving that.
Right.
And the kind of like you said, the art, the way, the style of telling a story, the visual presentation of that whole vibe, so different than American comics. Especially American comics like that I had been reading at the time, that like late 90s, early 2000s. Totally different, completely different, and very attractive to me as a new young artist.
I just feel sometimes, there can be good manga and bad manga, just like there can be good American comics and bad American comics. But yeah, there is an intimacy and a real expert control of like, guiding the audience at the exact pace that is intentional in a lot of my favorite manga. I'd be curious to hear any other favorites. Here's something. Let me just say, I read something like Wonder Woman Dead Earth. Yeah. It's a post-apocalyptic type of tale. And this may not have been an influence. It could just be that it's the setting. But I look at that and I was reminded of things along the lines of Fist of the North Star and Berserk. I don't know if either of those are anything you've ever read.
Oh, yeah. I've read both and they're amazing.
Yeah. Just curious.
Yeah. Oh, I love them. I think something that has influenced my work as a whole would be definitely Miyazaki's Nausicaa Valley of the Wind manga. Beautiful. I have the hardcover version and I ate it up. It's one of my absolute favorite comics ever. As you were kind of talking about good manga and bad manga, I think as a whole, manga, there's this kind of this cultural difference in storytelling, which sometimes I find to be a little bit of a block in me connecting with a manga emotionally. But for whatever reason, Nausicaa, it hits me in like all the deepest places.
That's nice.
And there's one panel specifically where Nausicaa's soldiers and her people, they think she's died. I think this is in volume 2. And she goes to embrace them and they all like come around her and they're so excited that she's not actually dead. And there's barely any words to it. And it is so powerful. It's just this tiny little square panel that's in the middle of the page. And it says so much about her people and how she feels about them all at once. It kind of like choked me up, actually. And I was like, this guy can do this in one panel. That's like God level. It's incredible. Yeah. So I saw that, and that's just something that got me so inspired. I was able to go to the Nausicaa, the Miyazaki Museum in Japan. That
Same.
was an incredible moment for me personally. Yeah, I'm sure you loved it
Beautiful.
too.
Beautiful.
And
very special. It's very immersive. You definitely feel a little bit like you're in that world.
You do. And I think also the fact like it helps that, you don't speak any of the language, and there's just the whole trip is kind of a whirlwind, and then you're in this magical place, and it's been so inspiring to you as an artist. It's really
but you know what I think is the coolest thing about just art in general, and comics can be this, is that like it finds those commonalities between us, even when we can have very different culture and stuff like that. Some things can seem very exotic, but some things in storytelling can just be like, I relate to that on a very human level. Like I can feel the empathy there. Like, and that's kind of beautiful. You can do that with music too. Like, music transcends cultures. Like you're never going to come across like even like the deepest racist. It's like, I don't like music. Like people like these things. You know what I mean? It's kind of wonderful.
It is.
But that's just me getting a little philosophical.
Oh, it's great.
Let's go back to your work specifically, and I'll stop trying to guess like where influences come from. But I'm curious, is there one of your works that feels the most personal to you at this point?
Yeah. Murder Falcon, hands down.
Murder Falcon. Makes sense. Very personal story. Yeah. Was it that way from the beginning with the idea, or did it just become more personal as you were telling the story? Because you don't learn everything about the character until the end, but I'm sure you had that mapped out.
There was an element of, I had been through a lot physically in 2016. Like the whole year for me, like I felt like my body was like rejecting my my soul, just like did not want to exist. I was going through like a lot of chronic pain issues, a bunch of health stuff, to the point where like it was really starting to affect my emotional state. And it was really the first time in my adult life that I had really struggled with anything like that. Because I'm a pretty young guy, and so that was kind of like the thing that like initially kind of pushed Murder Falcon into existence. And when I first started Murder Falcon, the main character, a spoiler warning if you have not read Murder Falcon, but the main character, when I first started, his wife actually had died. He was trying to recover from that, and something was not sitting right with me as I was working on it. I was like, it's like too much like it's just been done. This has been done.
Yeah, it's a cliche when you just say like somebody lost somebody, and you don't get to know that person really. They were just there to form somebody else's backstory. It doesn't always feel earned.
Right. And not to say that it can't be done. I mean, it totally can. No. But there are times when I'm writing a story and things are just not clicking. And I know the concept is solid, but it's like the emotional component. It's almost like a certain gear needs to meet another point in the story or in your mind where it all comes together. And it was not until, I had to kind of like, again, like put my own self inside the story. And like I did with Extremity, I had to put my own personhood in there to make the story work. That's just what had to happen. And it required me kind of being a little more honest with myself within Murder Falcon. And I did not have cancer or anything like that. It's just cancer is something that is very universal, that is immediately like, I get it.
Of course.
And the fact that it was like actually Jake that had this near-death experience with this sickness, it just flipped everything on its head, and it made everything work immediately. And also made for a great issue 4 reveal that I'm very proud of. But it required, again, Murder Falcon required this kind of openness and honesty that I feel like is not a requirement when you tell stories. But for me as a storyteller, I feel like I need to like take some part of my heart, and it's very romantic to say, sorry if it's dramatic, but put it inside my own stories. Otherwise, they just don't work for me.
Yeah. You put yourself out there when you put something so personal into a story. How do you react, would you say, to when there's criticism out there, whether that's, a formal, article review or just social media? Is that something that you even look into, or do you try to keep any sort of shield up? How do you handle any of that?
Well,
What's your approach?
firstly, I'd say that, honestly, like 95% of all the things that are said, even like on the internet about my work, are positive. Um, I I try and say as little as possible on the internet so that as little BS comes back to haunt me in any way, shape, or form. I try and let my stories speak for themselves. Um, and that has been so far, I think, a good strategy for me to maintain my emotional health. That being said, when there are people that just post dumbass opinions about my work, there is a little bit of frustration there. Um, I don't like when if something that really makes me angry is like when things get co-opted. Just because I maybe don't say anything specific on social media or whatever. I remember like the Comicsgate people, because I didn't have any political statements in Murder Falcon, and it was really fun that they thought that I was like part of their crew. It made me so mad. So it's more stuff like that where people assume stuff about me and try and put me into a bubble that really upsets me and gets me. I don't know. It actually like makes me want to punch someone, but that is what it is. I have no control over that. And when people say they don't like something, they have a complete right to that opinion. But every once in a while, you'll get some smartass who like tags me in a post on social media or something like, "This sucked," and I just respond in all caps, "Rude." I want to be respectful of this person. They are a human being, and I don't want to like attack their personhood. But at the same time, I feel like there's a truth that needs to be said. Like, that's a rude thing you said. There was no reason for you to tag me in that. If I'm searching my own name on Twitter and there are people talking crap, that's fine. You do that all day. That's your prerogative, and I have no reason to look at that. But if you tag me, that's a step too far. Now you're going to hear from me. I'm not going to attack you, but I am going to say that you're being rude.
When you work on something like, say, a Beta Ray Bill, does that feel as personal to you, or is that just sometimes more fun? Like, do you think that, like, essentially working with somebody else's toys and stuff, playing in their playground, can that be as personal to you?
I think there's different levels. I think like with Murder Falcon, I kind of like really like. It's almost like my whole self is encased in like an Iron Maiden and then transformed into Murder Falcon for like people to read.
Okay.
That's a very like dramatic way to put it, but that's honestly how I feel. With Beta Ray Bill, I feel like I may be like just from where I was at emotionally, or like the necessity of the book needing to be out. And also like, it's not my own characters. All kind of equal out to me, kind of like taking a little piece of myself and putting in there. So maybe just not as much, but there are truths in there that like really I feel like are important and are part of me. Same thing with Wonder Woman. A big thing about Wonder Woman that I like really helped me start the story is, as a new parent, I just had a kid in 2018, and starting to think about, like how much can I actually trust the world? Like I have a kid now. It's not just me. It's important for me to be able to protect my daughter, but at what point do I release control? And so those are some of the questions that I started asking myself as I started thinking about a loving, almost godlike being like Wonder Woman, where she has this love for the earth, a love for her mom, a love for her people, and there's a lot of complicated feelings there. So that's something that definitely I put into Wonder Woman, and I don't know. It comes from a lot of different places, and it's every project's a little different. Some is more, some is less, and
see, I guess I look at your work and the ones that you've specifically written as well as illustrated, and there will be themes, like you said, of love. There can be themes of sickness, but one thing that's so far actually been shared across each piece, and I'm curious if this will be intentional, is themes of loss. In Extremity, it's losing, a limb. It's losing your artistic identity. In Wonder Woman, it's losing family. In Beta Ray Bill, that's humanity. What else? in Murder Falcon. It's like, health and friends and stuff like that. Like, is that been intentional? Do you think that you've hit loss so many times?
I don't
Is
think
that something that interests you? No.
I know it's not necessarily something that interests me or something that I think I go for on purpose. I definitely see what you're saying. I think I do feel like I really love to have fun in my work, and
It is.
yeah, it's a blast, right? It's fun.
Yes.
But at the same time, if it's all that and none of the like kind of heavy stuff, then a lot of those like fun moments or like cool punches or violence or whatever, it just doesn't land as big and as loud as I want it to.
Okay.
But I feel like the stakes need to be really high, and also like, I don't know. This is kind of a critique of genre fiction, and I don't want to sound like like a professor that is like talking too much, but I feel like genre fiction can be very safe. It's very safe to hide behind a lot of stuff as a writer that are tropes of what you might find in a comic book story, vampires or sci-fi or fantasy. And I am a huge fan of so much stuff, but the stuff that really moves me is the stuff that it feels like there's something real behind it, like in the sense that like someone's like kind of putting something on the line. Yeah, it's kind of a esoteric way to say it, but I feel like in order to have stories that I want to tell, I need to have that, and I think that might equate with that kind of heaviness, that loss that you're talking about, because a lot of these characters go through so much crazy crap. Like there really has to be like some sort of loss for there to be a push.
It's very personal, I guess, is what I'll say, because stakes are always important to making a story mean something. But, that stake could be like, if I don't save the day, my girlfriend's going to die.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of these are like somebody's already lost something that's very personal to them, and maybe they can either go through a healing process or at least come to terms with that loss, or hopefully find a way to fix it. But yeah, I just found it very, very personal stakes thus far in your writing. Tell you what, let's pivot and talk about your upcoming book. Do a Powerbomb. Is this going to be just as personal? Is this going to be bombastic? Is this going to be everything? I mean, we're talking a pro wrestling comic. Tell you what, let's back up and ask a simpler question first. Has there ever been a successful pro wrestling comic in America? Because I know there has in Japan.
There has in Japan, and I have searched far and wide on the internet for them and paid many a penny to get them delivered to my house. My wife and I were actually going to go to Japan in October of 2020. We had everything planned out.
Same.
And that was where I was going to be on my research for the book, because a lot of it actually happens in Tokyo, at least a big part of the first issue. Mm-hmm. And of course, that didn't happen. So I spent some of our travel budget on rare Japanese wrestling mangas.
Good.
But here's what I'll say about American wrestling comics. I think for the most part, this is starting to change. Like with Crimson Cage, a fantastic book that's coming out right now. But I think as a general statement, like a lot of wrestling comics you see in the States are satellite creations of a wrestling promotion.
Sure.
Where a wrestling promotion will almost like, kind of like, well, we can make comics, so let's do that. And it's more about the promotion and getting in like kind of the promotion kind of stretching out its its ability to make money.
It's marketing.
Different medias. Yeah. I haven't seen a ton of comics that just celebrate comics as well as wrestling, like in a whole package. I'm sure it's been done. I'm not super familiar, honestly, with the wrestling comics market. Mm-hmm. So that was the goal. I have this intense love of pro wrestling, and I love the moves, and I love the drama. I love so much stuff about it, and I also love comics, and I also love genre fiction, and I love making things bombastic. And I knew from the beginning that I did not want to make a wrestling comic that was just about like real life pro wrestling with cool moves. I wanted it to have that kind of otherworldly element that you would find on a comic book shelf that I love and makes things interesting. I also wanted to make sure that I kept it grounded within the context of a actual wrestling ring. I don't want necessarily people just doing power bombs off the moon. I want it to be in a ring, but with that kind of added twist of a necromancer entering the picture.
I just took a moment here to before you did do a power bomb, you did throw in some specific wrestling moves into like Beta Ray Bill.
I did.
If you know wrestling, you're like, oh, you did a specific Rainmaker in like issue 1 or 2. I'm sorry, issue 2. And now I'm looking at 5, where Beta Ray Bill picks up Surtur, and I mean the way he grasps him. That's a wrestling move. Nobody like sort of in real life like necessarily goes for that, but it was just great. Like, for that, like, so do you get to justify to like your family, like, I need a few minutes of quiet time to watch NJPW or AEW to like find the move, or is that just like stuff you're already remembering?
It's really one cool thing is I get to, for the duration of this project, write off my New Japan Pro Wrestling subscription. And whenever I buy an AEW pay-per-view, I also write it off like 100%. And it's awesome because I totally can do that. And I do keep up with AEW and New Japan quite closely.
I just realized they're having a cross-promotion event. Is that in Chicago?
It is in Chicago.
Oh my God. What do you have, like ringside seats already? Or something?
I wish. I could not get anywhere near ringside, but I will be in the building.
You will. That is awesome. That is awesome. I know that for you, that's probably going to be like really exciting, right?
It's a huge deal. It kind of feels like my wedding day, but like not as cool.
She's not going to watch this. That's okay. She's not going to be watching.
A joint union of the most beautiful kind. I'm so excited.
That's pretty exciting. That's pretty soon. Let's back up and like cool. Like this is an influence. Like let's dig into this. When did you discover pro wrestling? Like what sort of either year or era, promotion? Like what first sunk its teeth into you? Who hooked you?
The big thing when I was growing up for all the kids except me was pro wrestling. This was like the mid to late 90s where that Attitude Era was going so strong.
Yep.
And I remember kids were wearing 316 T-shirts, and I thought that it was the Bible.
Well, it originally sort of was, wasn't it?
316.
Because wasn't that when Jake Roberts?
For God's world. And I remember I walked up to it. Yeah. So I remember going up to a kid and like saying like, "Oh, this is a Bible verse," and they're like, "No, bro, that's not what it is." And
not anymore.
Making a total fool of myself. But I was not allowed to watch wrestling growing up, and so I missed out on that, even though I wanted to. And I kind of, as I grew into an adult, I knew it was there, but I never really been into it. And then when Fiona, my first, was born in 2018, she was not a very good sleeper, and we were having to take shifts, Rachel and I, just kind of holding her for hours on end, late into the night. And I remember just like, you do have to be present with a baby, as you're like coaxing them to sleep, to the point where you can't really like watch a documentary because there's always something going on with the kiddo. But you can watch pro wrestling because there's like an element of music to it where it's just like you kind of know the moves. I didn't know the moves then, but a few of my comic book friends, specifically I think it was Ramon Villalobos, who was actually drawing a New Japan character back in 2017. We were hanging out in a hotel room at a show, and I loved the look of this character that he was drawing. I didn't know who it was. And I was like, Ramon, like, what are you doing there? And he's like, oh, I'm doing a commission for this guy. I was like, who is that? And he's like, oh, this is Tetsuya Naito from New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I was like, what's New Japan? Like, that's so cool. Like, he looks great. He's like, dude, you got to watch it. I think you'd really like it. I was like, oh, maybe. But at that time, this is like 2017 or so, their website hadn't been translated yet, so you had to like figure out how to watch it without actually knowing Japanese. So I remember then when Fiona was born and she was having trouble sleeping, it's getting towards the summertime 2018, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to give this a try and see how it goes. And that time they had figured out a way to make the website into English, and I figured out a way to pay, put in my PayPal, and dude, I was kind of like intrigued, I was like, well, this is pretty cool, but it's also pro wrestling. I don't know how I feel about this. And then there was one specific match during the G1 Climax tournament, which I don't know if you know about that at all.
I don't really remember.
That's cool. So every year in Japan, in New Japan, they have this big tournament where you have wrestlers that come in from the United States, all over the world, and Japan. It's a round robin tournament where there's like 4 matches like every night for like a whole month.
Yes.
And the winner of the final gets a title shot at Wrestle Kingdom then in January.
It's the March Madness of pro wrestling.
It's the best way to put it, and I should have just said that immediately. But
no
yes,
worries.
You're totally right. It's the March Madness of pro wrestling. Some of the best matches happen in the entire year there, and it was Kota Ibushi versus Tomohiro Ishii, and they delivered this absolute banger of a match. I barely knew either competitor. Like, Ibushi did like a moonsault off like a balcony that was like 12 feet in the air. Absolutely crazy. They had this intensity to them that like I had never seen before, and the whole kind of presentation, which is different in American pro wrestling, it's like very sports based and kind of like real. It just sucked me in, and I was in all the way. Like I kind of had one
quieter audience too. They're very respectful in general. You got to get used to that.
It's crazy, and I had such a good time, and I was in, and I was kind of thinking like, man, I really love this, and my love of it just kept growing and growing. And then when AEW started in 2019, I was there. I went to their first official like pay-per-view, All Out, right before the TV show started, and it was so like it was forming in my head. I was like, man, I would love to do a comic that's straight like pro wrestling.
Interesting.
But I also love, as I said before, fantastical stuff like Dragon Ball Z, and I love tournament comics.
Okay.
I wonder, is there a way to mesh the two together?
Yeah.
And after many months of thinking about it, Do a Powerbomb was eventually born because of my love of pro wrestling.
I love it. I also like pro wrestling. I've sort of like had highs and lows of like when I've been into it and stuff like that. So I'm not always plugged into every current event, but I love it. I admire it a lot. When you watch pro wrestling, it requires a certain amount of like the audience to invest in like, the imagination, because these days we sort of know that the outcomes are determined by bookers and stuff like that. We sort of have to just ignore that when we watch it and just appreciate the athleticism and, invest in the contest. But in a comic, it's scripted. So are there still bookers in your world, or is that something we'll have to discover?
Well, it's a little bit of both. And I do feel like one of the big twists of the book does actually involve the concept of having someone get picked to be a winner.
Okay.
That is actually it was something I had to problem solve in the actual issue. It's in the actual story itself. And I think the solution that I came up with is a really good one. I'm really happy with how I managed to work that out.
It's exciting. So since we're talking about Do a Powerbomb, it's not too late to pre-order that, right? If people want to go to their comic shops and stuff like that.
Yep. Final order cutoff for Do a Powerbomb is May 23rd.
Yep. So we've got like almost 2 weeks by the time this comes out. So that's not this time through like Skybound or anything, right? That's just you doing it yourself. Image is the publisher, but like this is 100% yours.
This is 100% mine. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this with Image. Every other time it's been partnered with Skybound.
Right.
I'm jumping off the cliff. I am very.
You couldn't have come up with like a wrestling metaphor there. You're like I'm jumping off the top rope or something like that.
I'm doing a springboard shooting star press to the floor.
From the top of a cage.
Ooh.
Through the announcer's table, the Spanish announcer's table. Yeah, no. I'm excited. I think it's really cool. Let's end with something kind of fun.
Okay.
Do you have to share with us anything like an awkward comic book story? That anything like, for instance, conventions are like one of my favorite places to go to meet people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, but do you have any good awkward stories that you're willing to share with us?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think it's been long enough that I can tell this story. So I'll tell you about the time Jeff Darrow made me cry at a comic book convention.
Yes, please. It sounds like we've already got some stakes here.
So this was in between the Ghost Fleet and... No, I'm sorry. This was earlier than that. This was the end of 2013 going into 2014. I had just finished a book. It was not even a book. It was like a 16-page short story that I did with Dark Horse. It was an EVE Online video game short story.
Yep.
And I feel like I did a good job on it. My foreheads were too long, but that was way early DWJ. So, but I finished and I didn't have any work. And I had gotten to know Jeff Darrow a little bit. I did a pinup for the back of his book for Shaolin Cowboy. Like, I think it was my first published comic book art ever, is in issue 3 of one of his Shaolin Cowboy books that he did over at Dark Horse. And we were friendly, and he lived very close to me. He used to live in Chicago, and we would get together every once in a while and have coffee, and it was just super chill. So then he asked me if I wanted to work on a project with him, where his wife had worked on a screenplay, and they had wanted to turn it into a comic book, and they needed an artist.
Huh.
And he said, would you be interested in doing it? And I said, sure. So he checked in with me over Christmas if I wanted to do it, and I got back to him in early January, being like, you know what, I'm ready to pull the trigger. I don't have any other work, so let's rock and roll. And I said, and then he didn't get back to me, and then I called him and I left a message with his wife, and then I just never heard from him. And I was very young at the time in the comics world, and I didn't want to bother him, so I just didn't. And then 2014 rolls around, C2E2, and he's there sketching. I hadn't seen him or heard from him.
Yeah.
He had a long line, but I just, like, in passing, I was like, hey, where have you been? Good to see you. And he just screams at me. He's like, get the F out of my face. He just was yelling at me. Like, he was so mad. I don't know what happened. Like, so the reason I'd give you that whole backstory of saying yes to this project was because I think maybe he got upset that I didn't do the project, because 3 weeks after I called him, Donnie offered me the Ghost Fleet, and I hadn't heard from him. So I was like, yeah, let's do the Ghost Fleet. And that's what I assume happened. I still have no idea. And he was screaming at me, and I was like, this is in the middle of the show floor on C2E2 at Artist Alley. And I'm like, Jeff, like, come on, like, I am so sorry. Like, what did I do? Let's talk about this. He's like, I don't want to talk about it. Get out of my effing face. And he's got this line of people who are like, who the heck is this dude that Jeff Darrow hates? And it was like a total 180. I have no idea what happened. And I don't know, maybe a year went by. And so before that, I went back to my booth.
Yeah.
I was sharing with a friend. I was like, sat in my little tiny corner at C2E2, put my head in my hands, and I cried. Like,
oh my God.
I cried and cried. I was so upset. I had no idea what I had done wrong. And I was like, he must be upset that I took another gig, but he didn't get back to me, but I don't know what happened. Maybe he went into my spam folder. I'm checking my spam folder, like a maniac. I was deleted. You know how Gmail deletes your spam after like 30 days.
Oh yeah.
And I was just, I was inconsolable. It ruined my day. Oh, it's terrible.
I was hoping for like a stinky fan or something. You just dropped something on us.
Oh no. So then let's see. So then like a year goes by, and I'm like, hey Jeff, are you okay? Like, are we good? And he was like, I guess we're fine. I was upset with you, but it's okay now. And then we were friends again. So we're friends now. I know that he buys my stuff. He lives in France now. He goes into the comic book store and buys my books out there. Good. So I still have no idea really what happened. But there you go. Jeff Darrow, love you, bro. But woo, That was my heart was like bum 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 bum. Jeff
Of
Barrow was
course.
upset with me. He designed the Matrix.
I appreciate you sharing that. That is crazy. Awesome story. Sincerely appreciate you sharing it. I'm just glad that it sort of ends happy because those are some high stakes to that story. Like I thought you were going to be like, he was yelling, but then he was like, just kidding. Like I had no idea where that was going. Wow.
What are you going to do?
No, thank you. So let's see. So we recommend going to your local comic shop, putting in a pre-order for Do a Powerbomb, because that should be a lot of fun. What else do you have to plug? You want to mention like your social medias or anything like that? For instance, I know you've got a YouTube channel.
Yes, I do. I have a YouTube channel. It's called my YouTube channel is called Something from Nothing. And then my live show is called Friday with D-Dubs, and every Friday, at least I try to do every Friday, I go live. And I'm usually just drawing or answering questions or hanging out. I'm usually just drawing because on Fridays my days are nuts. I'm not sure why I chose Friday to do this. Probably because it was like a thing I just thought of on the top of my head and I went for it. But I'm usually playing catch up with my day, so you get to see me just doing the things that I'm doing normally. And it's just a very chill time, and it's just really, really nice. I do post some video stuff on my YouTube channel when I can, but man, editing takes forever. So
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
I basically have to choose: am I going to do YouTube or am I going to be a comic book artist? And this comic book artist is something that happens more often. So
It's a tricky balance, but of course, we're in like this era where no matter what kind of artistic project you have, you sort of have to work as your own hype man and your own marketing. And I think it's smart to have a YouTube channel. Obviously, there's guys like Cartoonist Kayfabe. They've done a good job building a very loyal audience for themselves by having a YouTube channel. But yeah, so you've got a YouTube. We've got a book coming out. Oh, I know what else we haven't mentioned. What am I thinking? Jurassic League. Let's quickly talk about this because this is one that you're not drawing.
no, and I'm co-writing. I'm not
You're
even all
co-writing.
writing. Yeah.
I did pick this up and I didn't think to say it because I haven't read it yet. I did pick it up this past week.
Awesome.
That's also a new book you got. Where did this idea come from? Because this is just utterly bonkers. You've got the Justice League of America as dinosaurs. Where did this come from?
So that actually was all Juan's idea. He had came up with the concept himself. He's a big fan of video games like Primal Rage. You also might remember the comic book series Age of Reptiles. Do you remember that series that Dark Horse put out? We're both big fans of that, which is basically like, dinosaurs and comics, doing dinosaur things. And it was Juan's idea that he actually pitched to DC, and DC asked me if I would kind of help out with the writing because Juan has never written a book before.
Okay.
So I've just been doing my best to kind of support Juan and his story, and it is his baby, and it shows. He is drawing the heck out of it, and it's fun. We're like riffing back and forth about different ideas that we can add to the story, and like the Dilophosaurus as Joker is like a thing that like we kind of came up with together, and but you know what? I have to give credit where credit is due. It was Juan that came up with the pitch, and it was Juan that has come up with 90% of the character designs. Like he is killing
That's
it.
great.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see him thrive in that way. And I'm excited that so many people are excited about it. It's great.
Well, definitely like tons of credit to Juan. Did you ever suspect that at this point in your career, though, instead of just, being a hired artist, that you would all now be sort of like, helping people write and stuff like that? Did you ever anticipate, or did you want your career to go that way?
It's funny. I'm always trying to stay open to any like new possibility. I do really like the idea of writing a book and having somebody else draw it. This process has been different because we have been co-writing. We're kind of coming up with the story together. So I've had to like let my storytelling instincts kind of like simmer down so that I can let him tell his story.
Right.
Which honestly has been a challenge for me. And so I'm trying to get better at that. And then also I as I've been doing this project, I can see myself really enjoying just writing, and having someone who's an artist. I've been talking with some of my close friends about possibly doing something creator-owned with them, and the idea is it's fun, when you start getting into like writing and without the not burden, without the kind of like time of drawing, your ideas can kind of just come up with, your brain can come up with these cool ideas that you maybe wouldn't have normally thought of.
Right.
And things maybe that I wouldn't even be very strong at drawing wise, but I know there's this other creator that is really good at whatever I might be coming up with. So the possibilities are endless, and you just never know. You never know.
No, right. No, I'm glad that you're just open to exploring these paths, because while it's a visual medium, and certainly your art was the first thing I noticed, obviously I became a fan because I'm connecting with the stories that you're writing. As long as we're sort of talking about, supporting somebody else's vision, let's give 2 seconds. Tell me about, there's one name that comes across on all of your titles. You do the drawing, you do the penciling, you do the inking. There's always one other name that's always on there, Mike Spicer. How did you guys get connected?
It's funny. So it was actually, I got to give credit to a fellow comic book writer artist, Brian Level, because when we were working on issue 1 of Extremity, and I had already moved on to issue 2 at this point, we had been looking for a colorist, and we found one, but they weren't answering their emails after issue 1. So we were waiting for issue 2 to come in, and they weren't hitting their deadlines. And after multiple kind of, emails like, hey, are you going to turn this in? Yeah. It never happened. So we had to look for a different colorist, and Brian recommended Mike Spicer, who I believe at the time had only really done a few Boom titles. And we gave Mike like just 2 pages to see like if his vibe was kind of cool. And he killed both the pages. This is from issue 1.
Yeah.
And when he sent in his colors for issue 1, we were just so blown away. They're fantastic. He really brought life to Extremity, and he's just leveled up his game every single time since. And I know I've sent you actually a few of the first issues of Do a Powerbomb, and I feel like he is even more better than where he was when we were starting, when we did Beta Ray Bill. He's just in every way, he's like elevating my lines. I love Mike. He's so great to work with. I
think it's a great partnership. You've got a very it can be very intricate. You can be as detailed as like somebody like Katsuhiro Otomo, or sometimes you've got like sometimes the thick lines and thick brushstrokes, but sometimes you have very intricate detail. Mm-hmm. And I've seen your black and white commissions. Gorgeous black and white work. Sometimes the colors can almost muddy that up if they're not the right thing. But, I look at something like, like here's a nice 2-page spread of one of your classic monsters, for instance. Yeah. And it's not going to come through as well on camera as it does in person. But it doesn't overpower the art. He's got just a nice gradient without the colors being too dark so that we can still see this monster at night. I think that's a good example of like somebody sort of like enhancing the artwork and like giving that some depth in a way. I don't know. So I just, that's the same name I keep seeing show up in all your work with Mike Spicer.
Do you know, it's awesome because like when we first worked together in Extremity, the only real note that I had for him was, I really don't want my drawings to be rendered color-wise at all. I really love flat colors.
Yeah. I do too.
Yeah, that's my personal preference on my own line work, and I told him that, and he was like, "Cool, I'll run with it." And we've just gotten more and more synonymous. What's the word where you're like working together really well side by side? Symbiotic. Thank you. Where I'm like basically giving him no notes like at all in the coloring process.
And I see what you're talking about here, because, if we're looking at a page here, is there a little bit of a gradient compared to like what we would have seen in the 80s? Sure.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're right. Like these are primarily flat colors. You might have a little bit of texture or something, but like the grass here isn't so heavily rendered that it's distracting from like the characters, which is the most important thing. And I agree, like in comics, like sometimes that painted style to artwork can really overpower the penciling. I've seen it ruin some really lovely artists. And it's like, just because that technology is there with Photoshop does not necessarily, and our printing techniques, it can handle it, but it can overpower the line art. And I think that you can lose something there. So yeah, I definitely think he's doing something really, really solid for you here. Anyway, just wanted to mention that since we were talking about, like, supporting, you're in a supporting type of role, but yeah, still part of the team.
In my many creative decisions and career decisions in my life, choosing Mike Spicer to be my colorist has been like in the top 3 best decisions I've ever made.
I think you guys have a great partnership. Just wanted to give him a shout out, because also colorists and letterers don't always get that same shout out. I know you've also worked with Russ Wooten a number of times. He's a great letterer. I'm serious about that. I've been following his work from the beginnings. Anyway, I could go on and on talking about this stuff. I appreciate that you've given us some of your time today, Daniel. I know that you're probably pretty busy with all sorts of upcoming projects. Thank you for plugging, your social media and giving us some of your insights into your creative process. I think it'll be very valuable to readers like myself that just want to have maybe another level of understanding to your work. And there's always going to be a lot of people out there that are watching that are interested in also potentially breaking into the industry and are just curious about somebody's process and their path. So Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, there are merchandise links beneath the YouTube video, and you can always hit join on YouTube or visit Comic Tropes on Patreon to get access to special perks.